idea of being supremely happy, blessed, and immortal, indestructible. So he says in the second of these quotations, believe that God is an indestructible and blessed animal in accordance with the general conception of God commonly held. Well, everything is composed of atoms and void, so what are these gods like? Well, they're made of atoms too. In order to be indestructible, they've got to be in some far-off area where they're not going to be buffeted around and broken up by things colliding with them. And they're supremely happy, and the implication of that, in the next quotation on the top of the second column on page 2, they have no troubles. Because happiness for Epicurus was the absence of bodily pain and the freedom from mental disturbance. So the gods, being supremely happy, they don't have any worries. And if they were caring about human beings, they would really be worried. So they don't care, right? So quite contrary to the second principle that Plato wanted to enforce, Epicurus argues that the gods are indifferent. So don't think that they're going to punish you after death. This story that Critias talked about is false. And in the poem of Lucretius, Epicurus is represented as a kind of cultural hero who rescued human beings from the superstitious beliefs, that the gods were going to punish them. At the end of the first paragraph of the quotation from Lucretius, superstition in its turn lies crushed beneath his feet, and we by his triumph are lifted with the skies. I don't know if any of you have read Kurt Vonnegut. How many of you read Kurt Vonnegut? Okay, some of you. He's a science fiction writer and a kind of humorous guy. And in some of his books, he talks about the Church of God, the totally indifferent. Well, this is the church in which Epicurus would worship, if there was a point in worshiping gods who are totally indifferent. Okay, and then next quotation from Lucretius is again an explanation of the origin of belief. The second paragraph of which is the sort of explanation the gentleman over here gave to postulate something as the cause is, in this case, not of unusual celestial and atmospheric phenomena, but the orderly succession. This is a kind of standard sort of cosmological argument for the existence of a god, a designer, or creator, or whatever. If we see all this orderliness, and some being must have created it. Lucretius attributes this to being at a loss to account for the order in any other way, and of course Epicurus with his atomism would have given a different kind of explanation. I'm going to skip the next thing, which is the top of page 3, which is a hymn to Zeus by a Stoic philosopher. And I'll say a little bit about the quotations from Sextus Empiricus, which occupy the last 2 pages. Sextus Empiricus was a physician and a philosopher who lived about 200 of our era, so he's several hundred years later than anybody that I've talked about so far, other than Lucretius. And he was a skeptic. So he called himself a skeptic. He belonged to a school that was called Pyrrhonian skepticism. And the general approach of Pyrrhonian skeptics is to consider opposing views on any question about how things really are, and to set them out in such a way that you have equally powerful considerations on either side, and you end up suspending judgment. So the Pyrrhonian skeptics proposed to live their entire lives without having any beliefs about the way things really are. Okay, so you can just try to imagine what it would be like to live this. They had a recipe for how you make practical decisions and so on. And in the negative part of his writings, which are quite extensive and survive, he deals with various beliefs, various concepts, and the general pattern is first to consider whether the concept of something, whether it's cause or, in this case, the gods or virtue or whatever, is clear, and putting forward the different alternatives against one another. So you would even suspend judgment of whether there was a clear conception, and then, for good measure, to go on to the question of the existence. So we have this long quotation about the conception of the gods, first of which says, well, there's all these various conceptions, so how can any one of them claim to be the truth, because you can always set one of them against the other, right? Then he deals with all the different explanations of how we come to have a conception of the gods, and gives arguments against them. Why these explanations are not satisfactory. I don't have the time to go into the details, but if you're interested. So the kinds of things I quoted before, the explanations of Democritus, that of Prodicus, that of Critias, that of Lucretius, are all challenged here. So you're left in a state of suspending judgment as to how the conception of the gods originated, which of course is where Sextus wants to lead you. And then he turns to the question of the existence of the gods. So this is the passage on the second column of page 3. Not everything conceived of partakes of existence. So we got to investigate whether the gods that we conceive of, however we conceive of them, actually exist. And so we've got people who say they do exist, people who say they don't exist, and people who say, well, they no more exist than they don't exist. That's the third position, is essentially the Pyrrhonian one, at least to lead you to the point of seeing that there are equally powerful considerations for thinking that there are gods and thinking that there are no gods. So you suspend judgment about whether there are gods or not. You don't believe that there are gods, but you don't believe that there are no gods. That's an interesting state of mind that not too many people have. So this is stronger than agnosticism. You might call it adoxism. So you're not just saying, I don't know that there is a God, and I don't know that there is not a God. You're saying, I don't believe that there's a God, and I don't believe that there's not a God. I have no belief on the question one way or the other. Well, what he does, and I'm not going to talk about the specifics, is first to consider a number of arguments for the existence of the gods. He classifies them into 4 types, and in some cases finds difficulties with the arguments. And then I'm over on page 4 at the last full paragraph on the first column. Here's the arguments furnished on behalf of the existence of gods. Now we should show that the arguments for the non-existence of gods are not inferior to these in persuasiveness. So he sets up the arguments for the non-existence of gods after having put forward or described the arguments given for the existence of gods. And here are a couple of those.